January 10, 1954, 9:51 in the morning. Off the coast of the Italian island of Elba, a fishing boat rides a flat, glassy Mediterranean. The crew is working their nets. The sky is cloudless, visibility unlimited. A perfect morning. And then, from 27,000 feet above them, things begin to fall. Seat cushions, a luggage case, a meal tray, a woman's coat, a child's shoe, and then, bodies. The fishermen look up. There is no smoke, no sound of an explosion, no fireball, no trail of debris falling from a burning engine. There is only the blue winter sky and the things raining down from it, and the silence where an aircraft should have been. BOAC Flight 781, with 35 people aboard, had ceased to exist in less time than it takes to draw a breath. There was no Mayday call, there was no warning of any kind. The last contact, a routine position report at 9:50, stopped mid-sentence, the way a voice stops when a person dies while speaking. The aircraft had been in perfect condition, the weather was perfect, the crew had thousands of hours of experience, there was no collision, no fire, no structural history of any problem. The aircraft was simply, suddenly, not there anymore. And nobody, not the engineers who built it, not the investigators who spent the next year of their lives trying to answer the question, could explain why. To understand what happened off Elba on that January morning, you first have to understand what was lost. When the de Havilland Comet entered service on May 2, 1952, it was not merely an aircraft, it was a statement. Britain had survived the Second World War, and this was the proof that it intended to win what came after it. While Douglas and Boeing were still perfecting their piston-engine Stratocruisers and DC-7's propeller aircraft, the technology of 1945, Britain had built something from a different decade entirely. 4 jet engines buried flush in the wing roots, a pressurized cabin cruising at 40,000 feet, above the weather, above the turbulence, above anything the Americans were operating, speed of 480 miles per hour, London to Johannesburg in 23 hours instead of 4 days. Every passenger who flew the Comet described the same thing. Silence. Not the relative quiet of a smooth propeller airliner, actual silence. Where the Stratocruiser vibrated with the drumming of 4 28-cylinder radial engines, the Comet hummed. Where the Constellation lurched through cloud layers at 20,000 feet, the Comet floated above them, the horizon curving slightly, the sky transitioning from blue to the deep indigo that exists just below the edge of space. BOAC crew reported that passengers stood at the windows for entire flights and simply did not sit down. Boeing's engineers attended a Comet demonstration in 1952, flew home across the Atlantic on their propeller airliners, and said almost nothing. They were not men who embarrassed easily. The Comet embarrassed them. By 1953, the order books were filling. Air France had ordered Comets. Japan Airlines had ordered Comets. Pan Am was in active negotiation. The jet age was Britain's, and the Comet was its deed of ownership. Then Yoke Peter fell into the sea off Elba. GLYP, registration suffix Yoke Peter, had logged 3,681 flying hours. For context, commercial aircraft today are expected to fly 60,000 hours before retirement. Yoke Peter had barely started its working life. BOAC grounded the Comet fleet the day the wreckage began coming up from the seafloor. For months, the investigation examined every system on the aircraft: engine design, fuel system, electrical wiring, sabotage, fire. Nothing. The investigation found no definitive cause, and after modifications, declared the aircraft safe to return to service. BOAC resumed Comet flights on March 23, 1954. 16 days later, a second Comet fell from the sky near the island of Stromboli. Same altitude. Same circumstances. No distress call. No warning. 21 more people dead. The certificate of airworthiness was revoked that afternoon and never reinstated. 56 people were dead. The jet age that Britain had built, the 6-year head start on America, the filled order books, the Comet's name on the lips of every aviation minister from London to Tokyo, was finished. And there was still no explanation. What happened next is one of the most extraordinary investigations in the history of engineering. The Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough under Director Sir Arnold Hall, received what amounted to a blank check and a single instruction: find out what killed the comet by whatever means necessary, regardless of what the answer turned out to be. The Royal Navy swept 100 square miles of Mediterranean seabed with underwater cameras and drag lines, eventually recovering 70% of Yoke Peter's wreckage from depths of up to 800 feet. The fragments were catalogued and shipped to Farnborough, where they were laid out on an aircraft hangar floor and reassembled around a scaffolding frame in the shape of the original fuselage. Every piece was coded to its exact position in the aircraft. It was the largest and most consequential jigsaw puzzle ever assembled. The wreckage told them something important. The aircraft had not been destroyed by fire or explosion. It had broken apart in flight from internal stress. The structure had failed. But where and why? Metal does not simply fail for no reason. So they built a tank. They took a complete Comet fuselage, yoke uncle, sealed it inside a water-filled enclosure, and subjected it to repeated pressurization cycles. Pressurize, depressurize, pressurize, depressurize, simulating flights, hundreds of them, thousands. They used water instead of air for a reason that tells you how seriously they took what they might find. A pressurized air vessel, if it fails catastrophically, explodes. Water, which cannot be compressed, simply opens. They were certain something was going to break. They engineered the experiment so that when it did, it would not kill the people watching. After 1,830 simulated pressurization cycles, equivalent to 1,830 flights, Yoke Uncle tore open. The crack started at the corner of a window. The Comet had rectangular windows, not sharply square. The corners were slightly radiused, but rectangular. And at those corners, the geometry was doing something the designers had not fully accounted for. The concept of metal fatigue was not unknown in 1949. Every engineering student learned it. Metal subjected to repeated stress will eventually crack, even if no single stress event comes anywhere near the material's failure limit. Bend a paperclip back and forth. It does not fail on the first bend, or the 10th, or the 20th. But keep bending, and it fails suddenly, completely, with no warning. What the Comet's designers had not fully calculated was the interaction between the geometry of the windows and the stress imposed by operating at 40,000 feet. At that altitude, maintaining a breathable cabin pressure required a differential between inside and outside that was substantially higher than anything commercial aircraft had previously generated. The fuselage skin was under constant, significant tension. And at the corners of each rectangular window, that tension concentrated. The mathematical forces converged at those points. The local stress reached 3 times the average stress in the surrounding skin. 3 times, and the safety margins had been calculated for 1 times. On each of Yoke Peter's 1,290 flights, the crack at the window corner had grown by a distance invisible to the naked eye. A fraction of a human hair's width. Invisible at inspection. Invisible to any instrument of the era. Growing flight by flight, across 3,681 hours, until the crack was long enough that the pressure trying to escape through it was greater than the metal trying to hold it closed. The aircraft did not explode. It unzipped. In a fraction of a second, along the line the crack had been quietly drawing for years. The Farnborough Report, published in 1955, was read by every aircraft manufacturer on Earth within months of release. Its conclusions were not disputed. They were immediately and permanently adopted. Oval windows, all of them, on every aircraft from that point forward. The elliptical or circular shape distributes stress evenly around the entire frame. There is no corner, there is no point of concentration. The geometry itself is the safety measure. Metal fatigue testing became mandatory for aircraft certification, not just of fuselages, but of every primary structure. The principle of damage tolerance was written into regulation. Do not design to prevent fatigue cracks because fatigue cracks in metal are inevitable. Design so that cracks grow slowly enough to be found and repaired before they reach critical length. The water tank method, developed at Farnborough to test Yoke Uncle, is still in use. Every oval window on every aircraft you have ever boarded is a direct consequence of what happened off Elba on January 10, 1954. every fatigue life limit in every aircraft's maintenance manual traces back to those 35 people falling into the sea. The safety that modern aviation takes for granted was purchased at a price that Britain paid in full before anyone knew it was owed. When the redesigned Comet 4 entered service in October 1958, oval windows, stronger fuselage, rebuilt from first principles, it crossed the Atlantic 3 weeks before the Boeing 707. Britain's jet airliner beat America's jet airliner to transatlantic service. By 3 weeks, after a 6-year head start that had evaporated entirely, the airlines that had been ordering Comets in 1952 were now operating 707s. The order books were someone else's. The jet age that de Havilland had invented and paid for in blood and years had been collected by Boeing. The engineers who designed the original Comet were not negligent. They were not reckless. They were working at the absolute frontier of human knowledge, building an aircraft that had no predecessor to learn from, making a mistake that the entire engineering world would spend the next 4 years developing the tools to understand. The framework those 4 years produced has never been superseded. It is the foundation on which every aircraft flying today was certified safe. Look at the window beside you the next time you fly. The curve of it, the way the frame never comes to a point. That shape is not an aesthetic choice. It is not a manufacturing convenience. It is a memorial, pressed in aluminum, to the lesson that 56 people paid to teach.